This is HOA land.
The first impact shook my windows. Not thunder, not a crash on a highway. Metal hitting concrete. I rolled out of bed barefoot and hit the porch just in time to see sparks explode off the edge of my bridge. A bulldozer blade slammed down again, bang, wood snapped, water sprayed, and the whole structure groaned like it was being ripped apart alive. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted into the dark. Diesel fumes burned my throat. Floodlights blinded half the creek. Mud sprayed my jeans as another machine crawled forward like it was hunting something. And then I saw the logo painted on the side of the truck. HOA. My stomach dropped straight through my boots. That bridge wasn't decoration. It was the only access to my ranch. My grandfather built it with his hands. Every delivery, every emergency vehicle, every memory crossed that wood. And these people were shredding it like scrap. I ran toward the noise, heart slamming, fists clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms. A woman in a reflective vest stood near the machines, arms crossed, calm as a grocery line. "You need to shut this down," I snapped. "You're on my land." She didn't even look at me, just waved at the operator. The blade dropped again. The bridge collapsed. Water exploded upward. Beams twisted. My access disappeared in seconds. Something hot surged up my chest. Not fear, not shock. Rage so sharp it made my vision pulse. "You just destroyed private property," I yelled. She finally turned toward me and smiled. "Correction," she said. "We cleared an obstacle." "You people always get emotional when progress shows up," she said. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a mistake. This was a takeover, and they had absolutely no idea who they'd just declared war on. By sunrise, the bridge was unrecognizable. What used to be solid planks and handset beams was now a pile of crushed timber half sunk in mud and creek water. Bent nails glinted in the morning light like little teeth. The air still smelled like diesel and wet dirt. They hadn't just damaged it. They'd erased it. An orange sign stood planted right where the ramp used to start. Unauthorized structure removed. Community Improvement Project. Community. I stood there reading it 3 times, jaw tight enough to ache. 20 acres of quiet ranch land, miles from their manicured sidewalks and mailbox rules. And suddenly, I was part of their community. I kicked the sign over. It splashed into the creek and floated sideways like trash. That's when the emails started rolling in. Violation notice. Access compliance warning. Survey authorization update. Every message stamped with the same HOA letterhead. Smug language. Like they were congratulating themselves for deleting my property overnight. I drove down to the county office before lunch, dirt still crusted on my boots. Pulled the old land plats from public record. Same boundaries my family had owned for decades. No easement, no transfer, no expansion approval. Nothing had changed, except someone had decided it had. When I got back, a pair of reflective stakes had appeared along my fence line. Bright orange. Fresh. Someone had been back while I was gone. My pulse climbed again. They weren't just removing the bridge. They were measuring me, testing how much I'd tolerate before pushing harder. I snapped photos, wide angles, close-ups, tire tracks still damp in the soil. Every detail burned into memory. Because the thing about bullies with paperwork is they get sloppy when they think you're powerless. And they were already getting sloppy. Late that afternoon, a black SUV slowed near the gate. Didn't stop, just rolled past slow enough for the tinted window to lower a few inches. I saw the same woman from the night before. She didn't wave. She smiled. And for the first time since the machines hit my bridge, something colder than anger settled into my chest. This wasn't done. Not even close. It started with a truck idling at the end of my driveway. Same black SUV. Same tinted windows. Same quiet engine hum that didn't belong out here this early in the morning. I noticed it when I stepped outside with the dog and felt that weird, instinctive prickle up the back of my neck. The kind that tells you someone's already been staring at you. The dog stiffened first. Low growl. Hackles raised. I followed his eyes and saw the SUV sitting just past the fence line, half hidden behind mesquite brush like it didn't want to be noticed, but absolutely wanted to watch. I stood there for a long second, coffee cooling in my hand, heart thudding. The window slid down an inch. A phone lens peeked out. Click. My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. You got a problem? I shouted. The window slid back up. The SUV rolled away slow. Real slow. Like a threat wrapped in patience. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. HOA violation. Improper equipment visibility. I stared at the screen, then back at the empty road. They hadn't been checking property. They'd been checking me. From that point on, the pattern locked in. A slow drive-by in the morning. A parked vehicle near the ridge by afternoon. A glimpse of a phone raised behind dark glass. Then the email. The fine. The warning. Every day. Every move. Like being hunted by paperwork. 2 board members showed up after lunch, pretending to inspect my fence. Measuring tape snapping. Clipboards tapping. Whispering to each other like I wasn't standing 10 feet away. One of them paused near the destroyed bridge and looked straight at me. You could have avoided all this, she said. The words landed heavy. I could feel anger surging up my chest. Hot, tight, dangerous, but I forced it back down. Losing control was exactly what they wanted. That night a delivery truck refused to cross the dirt access path I'd carved after the bridge collapsed. Liability risk, the driver said. He turned around and left. No supplies. No fees. No access. An hour later, another HOA notice landed in my inbox. Failure to maintain safe ingress. Penalty applied. My hand shook as I lowered the phone. They destroyed the bridge. They blocked access. Then they fined me for it. That wasn't stupidity. That was pressure. And pressure always means that someone thinks they've got you cornered. I didn't sleep much after that. Every sound outside felt louder than it should have been. Wind through the trees. Gravel shifting. An engine far off on the highway. My brain kept replaying that smile from the SUV like a warning label burned into memory. Just after sunrise, the dog started barking hard. Not playful, not curious. Territorial. Sharp. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. 3 people stood near the creek. Bright vests. Clipboards. Metal stakes planted in the dirt like little orange knives slicing into my property line. One of them leaned over the mud where the bridge used to sit, measuring distance like he was laying claim. My stomach dropped. I walked straight toward them, boots cutting through wet grass. You're trespassing, I said flat. One of the men barely looked up. Survey work. On private land. He finally met my eyes. HOA authorization. That phrase again, like it was supposed to erase everything else. I could feel anger pushing against my ribs, demanding release. My hands clenched and unclenched at my sides. You don't have permission to be here, I said slowly. Pack up and leave. One of the women smirked and hammered another stake into the dirt. Talp, talp, talp. The sound echoed louder than it should have. That's when I pulled my phone out and started recording. Wide shot of their faces. Close-ups of the stakes. The GPS coordinates. Their vehicle plates parked just beyond the fence line. Suddenly, their confidence cracked. The man stepped backward. We're just following orders. Good, I said, because those orders are illegal. They packed up fast after that. No more smirks. No more attitude. Just hurried movements and tight jaws as they loaded their equipment and drove off. But when they left, the damage stayed. Stakes still lined my creek bank like boundary markers for a land grab. I yanked every single one out and piled them in the bed of my truck. As I stood there staring at the torn-up soil, a heavy realization settled in. They weren't bluffing anymore. They weren't posturing. They were actively carving pieces of my land away. And people don't escalate like that unless they're getting desperate, which meant the next move wouldn't be polite or small. The letter was already in my mailbox when I got back from town. Thick envelope, official-looking seal. My address printed in blocks inked like a warning label. I stood there longer than I should have, turning it over in my hands. The paper felt heavier than paper should feel. like it carried weight instead of words. Inside was a violation notice. Actually, 3 of them. Unauthorized structure, environmental hazard, obstruction of community access. I let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. The bridge they demolished. The creek they were now trespassing on. Somehow all of that was my fault. The fine stacked up fast. Daily penalties. Threat of lien. Failure to comply may result in enforcement action. Nice language for legalized bullying. My jaw tightened as heat crawled up my neck. I could practically hear that SUV woman's voice inside the sentences. Calm, smug, untouchable. I drove out to the creek again, boots crunching gravel, eyes scanning the tree line. Nothing looked different at first. Then I saw the orange mesh fencing. It stretched along the bank where the survey stakes had been yesterday. Cheap plastic barrier tied to steel posts, blocking access like they were already claiming possession. A small sign flapped in the breeze. HOA Development Zone. No trespassing. I stood there staring at it, chest tight, pulse hammering in my ears. They put a no trespassing sign on my land. The audacity almost knocked the air out of me. I reached out, grabbed the fence, and gave it a hard shake. The plastic rattled like cheap teeth. For half a second, I considered ripping the whole thing down, just letting anger drive the decision. Then I stopped myself. That's what they wanted. A reaction they could spin. A mistake they could weaponize. I pulled my phone out instead. Photos, video, timestamps, GPS markers. Every angle documented. If they were building a case, I was building one faster. But as I stood there, recording their fake boundary lines slicing through my pasture, one thought kept pressing heavier into my chest. They weren't backing off. They were digging in, and the deeper they dug, the uglier this was about to get. 2 days later, a county truck rolled up my driveway like it owned the place. White door panels, dust cloud trailing behind it like a warning flare. I watched it from the porch, jaw already tight. A man stepped out wearing a tan uniform and mirrored sunglasses. Clipboard tucked under his arm. Calm posture, the kind of calm that comes from thinking you're backed by authority. Morning, he said. Code enforcement. Of course it was. He explained it like he was reading weather. Complaints filed. Alleged obstruction. Possible safety violation near a waterway. HOA request for inspection. I let him talk. Let him stack words on top of words. Inside, something ugly simmered. We walked the property together. He took photos of the creek, the temporary fence, the damaged bridge footing. He frowned at his tablet like the data wasn't lining up with the story he'd been fed. They're saying this blocks emergency access, he said. Funny, I replied, because that bridge has been there longer than their entire subdivision. He paused at that. I showed him photos on my phone, time-stamped shots of the bridge before demolition, the survey crew trespassing, the HO fencing installed overnight. His eyebrows pulled together. That's not what I was told. Exactly. He made notes, took more pictures, asked more careful questions now. The tone shifted, less confident, more cautious. Before he left, he said quietly, I'll flag this for review. Not a victory, not a defeat, just a crack in the wall. That afternoon, the HOA email hit my inbox. Short, sharp, legal sounding. Cease interference with authorized development activity. I laughed out loud this time, a dry, angry sound that surprised even me. They were doubling down, pushing harder, trying to scare me into folding. I leaned back in the chair, stared at the ceiling, and felt the weight of the situation finally settle into my bones. This wasn't a neighbor dispute anymore. This was a power fight, and power fights don't end politely. They end when someone loses control. The knock wasn't polite. 3 hard hits against the metal gate. Bang, 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 not a neighbor knock. Not a delivery knock. That kind of knock that assumes you'll obey just because it's loud. I looked up from a porch and saw a young guy in a wrinkled button-down standing beside a dusty sedan with a logo magnet barely clinging to the door. He held a manila envelope against his chest like it contained nuclear codes. I didn't open the gate. I just stared at him through the bars. You the property owner? He called. Depend who's asking. He shoved the envelope through the bars. You've been served. HOA legal notice. The paper smelled like hot toner and bad confidence. I cracked it open and felt irritation spike instantly. No proper service language. No docket reference. No legitimate authority signature. It wasn't a legal notice. It was a scare tactic dressed up like one. They cited rules that didn't even apply to private land. Used the wrong enforcement body. Even screwed up the notice deadline. The kind of mistake you only make if you've never actually operated inside real jurisdiction. That's when it hit me. They were threatening me like they had no idea who they were dealing with. If they knew where I'd spent my career, they'd never pull this nonsense. I've worked at levels where jurisdiction actually matters, where words carry weight, where sloppy paperwork doesn't just get laughed at, it gets dismantled. You can't play legal games with someone who knows how the machine really works. My instincts kicked in automatically. I documented everything: timestamps, delivery method, camera footage, envelope markings. Calm, precise, controlled. Not because I was scared, because when people start bluffing with fake authority, the smartest move is to let them keep talking until they hang themselves with their own mistakes. I stepped back onto the porch and watched the kid speed away like he'd just completed a dangerous mission. Dust trailing behind him like a disappearing bluff. Good. Let him run. I pulled my phone out and started documenting everything. Envelope, timestamps, delivery method, vehicle plate, his face caught on a gate camera. Not because I was nervous, because once people start pretending to be powerful, they usually leave the most useful mistakes behind. They thought they were pressuring me. What they were really doing was waking up the wrong side of my professional life. And once that door opens, it doesn't close quietly. The silence afterward felt strange. No new notices taped to the gate. No surprise trucks crawling the access road. No smug emails packed with fake confidence. 3 full days of nothing. That's usually not peace. That's regrouping. On the 4th morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. Unknown number. Local area code. I'll let it ring twice before answering. This is the HOA legal office, a woman said, voice suddenly polite. The kind of polite people use when they realize they might have stepped into deeper water than expected. We just wanted to clarify a few things regarding your property. Clarify. That word told me everything. They weren't sure anymore. I kept my voice neutral. Short answers. No emotion. Letting silence do the heavy lifting. The way conversations shift when one side starts realizing they're not in control. She mentioned their filings. I asked one simple question. Which jurisdiction are you asserting authority under? Silence. Keyboard clicks in the background. A breath held too long. I'll need to confirm that, she finally said. Exactly. Later that day, a second call came in, this time from someone who introduced himself as their attorney. His tone was tighter, less swagger, more calculation. He referenced the demand letter. I asked him where it had been formally served. Another pause. He cleared his throat, changed the subject. That was when I knew the cracks were spreading. They had rushed their move, skipped process, trusted intimidation instead of legality. And now the system was starting to push back on them, quietly, invisibly, the way it always does before something breaks. I drove out to the creek again and noticed something missing. The orange fencing was gone. Posts pulled. Signs vanished, like they were erasing fingerprints. I stood there for a long moment, wind rolling across the water, a slow grin tugging at the corner of my mouth. They weren't advancing anymore. They were retreating. But retreats usually mean someone is about to panic. And panic people make dangerous mistakes, which meant whatever they tried next was going to decide how this story ended. The courtroom smelled like dust and old coffee, the kind of place where confidence either survives or gets exposed fast. I was already seated when the doors swung open, and there she was, the woman from the black SUV. Perfect hair, sharp blazer, phone glued to her ear like the world existed on her schedule. She walked in smiling, not nervous, not cautious, smiling like this was already over. She didn't even look at me at first, just dropped into the front row beside the HOA attorney and whispered something that made him chuckle. That laugh lit something cold in my chest. This was the same woman who had smirked on my land like rules were optional for her. The bailiff called the case. Everyone stood. The judge entered, and the energy shifted. The judge's eyes paused on me, just long enough to mean something, then flicked briefly toward her. Her smile faded half a notch. The clerk hesitated during roll call, double-checked the screen, looked up again. Small cracks. The HOA attorney launched into his opening with swagger. Talked about community safety, unauthorized obstruction, compliance failures. He gestured confidently. She nodded along, arms crossed, lips curled in quiet approval. I stayed still. Let them perform. When it was my turn, I spoke calmly. Measured. Precise. Just clean facts and documented timelines. I referenced improper service, jurisdiction issues, trespass evidence, procedural violations. Her posture shifted. She leaned forward slightly. Her smile thinned. The judge leaned in too. The attorney's confidence faltered, just a flicker, but enough to notice if you were watching closely. She finally turned and looked at me directly for the first time. Really looked, and something in her eyes changed. Not anger, not confidence, recognition, mixed with uncertainty. Like a puzzle piece didn't fit anymore. The judge asked me a follow-up question, not aggressive, but surgical. I answered without blinking. Silence stretched. Her fingers tightened around her pen. Whatever game she thought she was playing, the board had just changed. She lifted her chin like she was still in charge, but her eyes flicked sideways, uncertain for the first time. The judge stopped turning pages. The courtroom went quiet in that strange way where you can almost hear people breathing. He lifted his eyes and looked directly at me, not like someone checking a name, but like someone confirming a truth he already sensed. Before we proceed, he said evenly, "Please state your profession for the record." Every head turned. The HOA attorney froze mid-note. The woman from the black SUV straightened in her seat, chin lifted, still pretending control, but a thin crack of uncertainty flickered across her face. I let the moment stretch just long enough to feel the tension press into the walls. I was a federal judge. The words landed like a drop plate. Sharp, final, impossible to ignore. The attorney's face drained of color. His pen slipped from his fingers and clattered against the tile. No one moved to help him. The HOA woman's mouth opened, then shut, like her brain couldn't process what it had just heard. The judge held my gaze for a beat longer. Then his expression softened. "I do apologize, sir," he said respectfully. "It appears you've been subjected to unnecessary stress and harassment by this HOA." The people in the room began to whisper softly. The HOA woman stiffened. Judge said calmly, "Thank you, sir. Please have a seat." Then the judge's face hardened as he turned back toward the attorney. "Now answer this. Were you aware of this before bringing this action?" The attorney swallowed hard. "No, Your Honor." The judge's jaw tightened. "This federal judge served our country," he said firmly, voice rising with restrained anger. "And yet your organization chose to harass, trespass, intimidate, and abuse authority without proper jurisdiction or lawful process." His voice sharpened. "You issued defective notices. You authorized unauthorized entry onto private land. You misrepresented enforcement power, and you attempted to strong-arm a citizen using fabricated legal pressure." The HOA woman leaned toward her attorney, whispering urgently, panic bleeding into every syllable. He didn't even look at her. "Therefore," the judge said, voice hard and unmistakable, "this court dismisses this case with prejudice. You will not refile." Her face went pale, but the hammer hadn't finished falling. In addition, he continued, eyes locked on the HOA table, "This court orders substantial fines, full restitution for all damages, immediate removal of all unauthorized installations, and referral for civil review regarding abuse of enforcement authority. Frozen, shattered. Every ounce of confidence they walked in with collapsed right there. As people began gathering their papers, the HO, a woman finally turned toward me, voice tight, eyes burning with disbelief. You could have told us who you were. I met her stare calmly. You could have followed the law, and walked out while the room was still trying to breathe again.